Dobre Utra BI group. So I've made massive changes to my presentation, hundreds and hundreds of improvements. I just wanted to show you what they were. So we talk a lot about Perry and we talk about the hierarchical society that Japan transformed from. And we call this their Japan's pivot. They made these dramatic pivots in the change in the direction they went. And so I've done some great little animations to show you. You know, you're going one direction and then you turn an entirely different direction. So there are five major pivots in Japan's history. And you know, the first one was when they closed, the shoguns closed it, and then 260 years, then Perry came and it opened. Emperor Meiji came in, Sakichi Toyoda was born during the Meiji Restoration and their big transformation. Then the Sino-Russian War in 1905, where they sunk the Russian Navy and they became a world power. And then they militarized during this time from 1905 to 1937 when the war started. And it was during this time that Kiichiro Toyoda came of age. And then their fourth pivot was when they went from a militaristic government to a peaceful government under the Reconstruction with General MacArthur. And now they're rearming because of the Chinese to the tune of $320 billion. So those are their five major pivots that you need to be aware of in their history. So the history in 1854, the biggest single event in Japanese history was when Perry came ashore and challenged the shoguns, and the shoguns realized they were vastly behind in every regard. A very primitive society comparatively what the West had become, and that was during the Edo period. And the Edo period was very rich in culture, where Japanese culture developed, the tea ceremony developed, and their Edo villages were largely made of wood construction. And during this time, you know, the Edo village was a nice place, but for the common person, it was very minimal living. But for those people in the hierarchy, the shoguns, the daimyos, and the samurai and the upper class people, they participated in the tea ceremonies and the development of the Japanese culture. And you would see beautiful tea ceremonies with instruments that they had built. And this period had some beautiful cultural aspects, but at the same time, it was very, very primitive because they weren't even using wheels. If you could imagine at this time during the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain, there were railways everywhere, and they didn't even have wheels. They carried everything. So Perry comes ashore in these four black ships. These things are 15 times bigger than any ship that the Japanese have. They're very, very intimidated. When the ships came ashore, they were going 9 knots, which is extremely fast. A sailing ship was dependent on the wind, and it'd be lucky if it could go 1 or 2 knots. And here comes Perry in with these huge ships, belching black smoke. And it was very, very intimidating. Everyone went scattering like birds. The fishermen in the Edo Bay, or Tokyo Bay as we know it today, they just went running. And Perry was very, very obstinate. He demanded that he meet with one of the top leaders. And finally, after weeks of waiting, they brought somebody that was of sufficient stature. During this time, the Japanese artists, tried to render what Perry must have looked like a big ogre. This is what he really looked like, and this is what the Japanese thought he would look like because he was a monster. Even the ships, they embellished the ships to be almost monster alien type ships. And then you saw this reenactment of when Perry came ashore and what that might have been like. Now, I was fortunate enough to bring and take one of the Cossack teams, to the actual historic place where Perry landed, right in Tokyo Bay. But it was right on the outside edge of Tokyo Bay. He didn't sail all the way into the interior on the first time. But he did, after he met with them, map out more of the bay and did sail in a little bit further. But this is the actual landing spot where Perry landed over 170 years ago. So quite an historical, important place. And prior to that time, you were not allowed to trade with foreigners. There was only one place that the Japanese allowed any foreigners to be, and those were only Dutch foreigners. And this is Ado Bay, and this is where Perry landed. So to put this in perspective, you can see that the only place was way down in the port of Nagasaki, which was way down in the south of Japan, which was, keeping all foreigners way away from the heart of the Japanese culture up in the city of Edo, which was about 1 million people at the time. So Nagasaki, and this is where the atomic bomb was dropped as well, but this was the port city, and the Japanese, in pure Japanese style, built a small little island, and only on this island Westerners could go. They could never cross over the bridge and go into the mainland. They were resigned just to this one island, and at the time it was an island. There was no other land around it. So that gives you a little bit of idea on perspective where Perry landed, where Nagasaki was, where Nagoya is, and where Osaka and Kyoto is. These are places we'll be visiting. So it gives you a nice little overview perspective. This was the island, Dejima Island, and this is where all the trading happened. And nobody came across that bridge if you weren't Japanese. And so I went down there and visited this place. This is what it looks like. It's very interesting. So the shoguns and the samurai, for 260 years, they ruled everything all over Japan. That hierarchical society literally disappeared with Perry's landing in short order. And that entire structure, societal structure, was gone, 260 years. And so when I talked to Japanese people and the teachers at the schools, what were the two reasons that Japan moved to a flat society where they didn't have all this hierarchical structure? And they gave two reasons for the flat society. First, the imperial rule of Emperor Meiji. He was a practical imperial ruler. And the second reason why was because of losing World War II. It was very humbling to the Japanese to lose that, and that further flattened their society. And these are the two main reasons: Western ideas and losing the war. Now, Emperor Meiji was a practical imperial ruler, and one of the most important things he did was the Iroquois mission. And this mission, he gathered together 100 of the top scholars of Japan, the political people, and sent them on a mission to the United States and Europe. For 2 years, they traveled. They spent enormous amounts of time on the east coast of the United States. They first landed in San Francisco. They were greeted very warmly by the Americans, and the Americans wanted to help them and embrace them. They even met with President Buchanan, which was the president that Commodore Perry delivered the letter demanding the opening up of Japan. And that turned out to be a very good thing for Japan. Because at the same time period, or prior to this, the Chinese were faced with the same conditions. The British asked the Chinese to open up, and the dynasty in China said no, and they laughed and scoffed at the British, and it became the demise of the Chinese dynasty. But in this case, the Japanese understood the importance of adopting Western ideas. They did so, and it paid off huge for them. And the United States wrote about the Japanese. They appear to have improved upon the methods of their instruction. That means they were great followers, but before they were great leaders, they first had to become great followers, and they became very, very good at learning Western ideas and putting them into practice. So they progressed faster in 40 years than any other culture in history. They basically went from a backwards country to one of the most advanced and powerful countries in the world in just 40 years, and commanded the respect of the United States, Great Britain, France, and all the major powers, including Russia. So there were 5 charters of the Meiji.
This contained 5 main clauses. The first proclaimed that deliberative assemblies would be established to promote open discussion. This essentially proclaimed that Japan would now become a democracy with a parliament. The second clause proclaimed the end of the Japanese feudal state, as well as the social hierarchies which underpinned it. In tandem, the third clause asserted that all people would be free to engage in whatever occupation they wished. However, it was the fourth and fifth clauses which signified the greatest break with the past. These asserted asserted that Japan would end its reliance on the, quote, evil customs of the past, and would now begin to seek knowledge about all matter of things from around the world with a view to strengthening Japanese society and the new imperial government. The Iwakura mission, combined with the gradual introduction of Western innovations and methods, which had been underway since the 1850s, and the hiring of thousands of Western experts by the Japanese government from the late 1860s onwards, ushered in a transformation of Japan's economy which would take place during Meiji's long reign. Much of this mirrored the onset of industrialization in Britain a century earlier, in that the textile industry was one of the key aspects of it. By the late 1870s, domestic workshops and small factories were beginning to emerge for cotton and silk weaving. This was necessarily small-scale at first, but the introduction of coal-powered steam engines to operate large weaving machines and establish more elaborate factories soon saw the Japanese textile industry begin to expand very significantly.
Okay, so this is when Sakichi Toyota comes into play. So this Iwakura mission was typified by studious and curious, and this is Sakichi's mind. And they adopted these Western ideas. They were diligent students. The Americans, the Brits, they noticed they were very copious in the way they took their notes. And so the question and challenge for you is, are you studious and curious? We have now had the BI mission. We brought hundreds and hundreds of BI top leaders to Japan to learn best practices, in this case, best practices from Japan. Will you do the same thing that the Iwakura mission did for Japan? Will you do the same thing for Kazakhstan? So you can't be a good leader till you become a good follower. So this is the challenge. So that gave you a nice historical overview. And they went from this feudal system, and then Emperor Meiji came in, the practical imperial ruler, and we saw the 5 major pivots of Japan. And you have a clear understanding of the transformation that Japan has gone through and why, and what the thinking was behind the Japanese people that created this level of transformation. It's very important that you have all this solidified clearly in your mind so you understand the way forward for you. And I got some fabulous quotes from about 5 of your people after they had completed this Japan study mission, and it's really powerful. So the first one was from Slava. He said, Kaizen should be implemented evolutionary, not revolutionary. Slava, phenomenal. Laura, if you love your life, you'll love Kaizen. Zebat, we have received the vaccination against negligence and false goals. Igor, we need to be the virus that spreads through the BI group in Kazakhstan. And Zandos, I found that when the process is good, I enjoy the process. And he found just the iron in Japan.
Paul, it's an ironing process. Jandos is enjoying this process.
So isn't that something? When the process is good, you actually enjoy it, but when you
By
have a bad
ironing
process, you don't enjoy work.
shirt.
So the followers and the leaders. So these are some of the significant people in Japanese culture that helped transform Japan during this Meiji Restoration. Inazo Nitabe was an amazing guy. He was on that mission. He spoke English. He was a Christian, an agriculturist, economist, an author, an educator, a diplomat, 5 doctorate degrees, educated in the United States, and wrote his book, Bushido, The Way of the Samurai, when he was in the United States. And this talked about the 8 principles that really were the underpinning of Japanese culture. And this book influenced 2 presidents of the United States, John F. Kennedy, Theodore Roosevelt, and Robert Baldwin Powell, who was the founder of the Boy Scouts. So then we go into Sakichi Toyota, and his whole job, his whole goal in life was to help people and society. And he was born in 1885, right smack dab in the middle of the Meiji Restoration. So that hopefully gives you a little bit of an overview of all the improvements that I've made to the talk. Hopefully that helps solidify the historical background of Japan so you can make better decisions on your way forward in the transformation of the BI group and Kazakhstan.